Thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me again. And I hope that we are spreading your content as well as we talk to you, and more people will know about you. I'm happy to report that our blog is currently having increased traffic. It's a new blog, less than 2 years, but we are closing to 10,000 visitors per month. Our target is to get to 300,000, by about August. That's what we are doing. So
that'd be great. So I'm just adjusting my camera.
Okay. So what we want to talk about today is business models and organizational design. What I want to find out from you first is there a relationship between those before we define them?
I always love these difficult questions. The business model is the way you want to operate your business. So if you think of one of the ways of thinking about them is through an example of airlines. Mm-hmm. And you can think that all airlines have the same objective, to fly passengers from A to B. Mm-hmm. Maybe through a hub, but generally fly passengers from A to B. Some airlines decide to do it by offering a very high quality service, and they charge their passengers a lot of money so that they get good service, they get decent food, etc. Some airlines decide to do it on a very low cost to keep the prices down for passengers, and the passengers have to pay for each bag that they want to ship, and they don't get any food, or the food is extra on the flight or whatever. Mm-hmm. Now, those two airlines, they have the same objective, as I've said, but they've got very different business models. They've made different decisions about the way they want to operate their business. Mm-hmm. One wants to attract premium passengers, one wants to attract budget passengers. Mm-hmm. Now, if either one of those, the link to organization design then is how you are going to deliver that business model. So if you take the budget one, you can imagine that the budget one would want to automate as much as possible, to cut down on employee expenses, on potentially interactions going wrong between human beings, etc. And but on the other hand, a low budget one might decide they want more cheap employees, say 0 contract hours people, because the cost of automation is too much. So you could operate a low budget airline by being very highly automated, or by having low cost employees on 0 hours contract budgets or something like that. And those would be two different designs for the low budget airline. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if you think of it in stages, what is your objective? What is your business model, which is essentially the way you want to operate the business? And then how are you going to actually operate it in the detail, the nitty-gritty? That becomes then the design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, in practice, I do see a lot of people mixing organizational structure or organograms with design. But I think from your writings, there's a difference. Is that so, between looking at organograms and organizational design?
Yes. So you do need organograms, but if you think about them, if you think about an organogram and you start to ask yourself questions, what does an organogram actually tell us about the organization? Mm-hmm. And what does it not tell us about the organization? So an organogram tells us certain things, like how many direct employees there are on the payroll, mm-hmm. potentially who reports to who, mm-hmm. potentially sometimes they have grades associated with the role. Mm-hmm. They have the way the functions are structured in terms of one function A, function B, function C. So they tell us certain things. They don't tell us a lot of other things. They don't tell us who the contractors are, the people not on the direct payroll. They don't tell us how the people in one function interact and communicate with the people in the other function. They don't tell us how many of the work processes are automated. So if we go back to the low budget airline, you wouldn't be able to tell from looking at the organogram very easily how much of budget airline A's work was automated and how much of budget airline B's work was automated, because you'd only be looking at the people involved. And if you start to think about an organogram as giving a glimpse of some aspects of the people in the organization, you'll see all the aspects which, in my thinking, form the design are missing. A lot of them are missing. They're not telling you about workflow. They're not telling you about other people delivering work into your organization. They're not telling you about the level of automation. They're not telling you about interactions. They're not telling you about who are the main influencers in the organization. And you can't imply that assume that from an organogram, that you can't assume that people higher up the organization are influential in the organization.
So before I ask you my question around the issue of automation that you have highlighted, maybe let's start with what are the core principles of organizational design? Then I can follow up with some of my questions.
Sure. Well, in the new book that came out earlier this year, I talk about 5 principles of organizational design. The first one is about the thinking about the organization as a whole system. And that's where, when you think about what the organogram does not tell us, it tells us a lot of aspects. It does not tell us most of the aspects of a whole system. And it particularly doesn't tell us the linkages and boundaries between one part of the organization and another. The second principle is that the design is driven by the business purpose and the business model that we've just talked about. Unless you know what the business purpose is, say getting people from A to B, and you know what the business model is, high budget, high quality or low budget, you're not going to be able to design effectively. The third principle is about the thinking about the future. Now, if we go into the future and we stick with the airline example, we know that there's a lot of talk currently about the cost of fuel and energy prices and reducing carbon footprint. In the case of airlines, they are going to have to think about how they're going to operate an airline conforming with new regulations about fuel use, lower carbon footprint, and so on. And in fact, there's an article expressing exactly that question, and the article is about the cost of fuel and the types of fuel available to deliver sustainability targets by airlines. Now, unless you've got that kind of future focus, you're not going to start thinking, what sort of people do we need? What sort of business processes do we need to accommodate that coming legislation, or however we're going to deal with, fuel costs? And the fourth principle is about interactions and conversations. And they are critically important, and I'm sure you find it in your work. They're more important than the formal policies and the rules and regulations. The way people chat to each other and the way they do workarounds for all the idiocies in organizational life, that is how work gets done, is through interactions quite often, unless you're completely fully automated and you don't have any people. And the fifth principle, which I think at this point is the most critical one in a sense, although they're equally critical, is it's not a one-off thing. You can't design an organization once and expect it to work. You've got to be continuously looking at it. Because every day something is coming in that is going to change the way you think about delivering the work. I mean, think of, still with the airline example, think of the airlines no longer able to land in Russia, for example.
Yes.
That's an immediate redesign. What about their people there? What about the routes? What about the cost implications? What about the energy implications? Everything, single thing. And that has come, in a sense, unexpectedly. Although if you were looking at all the signs and what in the book I describe, and many people do, the weak signals, we will have known for several months and potentially a couple of years that could be a potential scenario. And we could have been planning for it.
Yeah. So if am I right then to say that the business model is how you operate, the organizational design in a sense is how you structure yourself to be able to deliver on your business model? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay,
but
thank you.
When you use the word structure, it's not just the people, it's the work processes and the policies and the other structures. And I did a while ago write a blog called "What Do I Talk About When I Talk About Structures?" Because there is a danger if you use the actual word structure, that people revert again to the organogram. They don't think more broadly about what structures are.
You were emphasizing the issue of automation. So let's say you are designing an organization. Where do you start? Do you start with the automation or with the identifying the processes, or you start by agreeing on the business model, then you look at the process? Which one comes first? Because there is always this debate that, I've heard people saying, no, we can't restructure or redesign our organization now because we need to automate or we need to look at the processes. And others have talked about process-based organizational design. Where do you start?
I start with what is the business model. So is it high quality premium passengers, or is it low budget tourist class? So start with that. Then you start to work out what is your business process for that. So where does the process begin? Where does it end? At a very high level, the main steps like lease aircraft. And then on the main steps that you look at across that flow, you then recruit from your organization, and sometimes externally to the organization, a multidisciplinary team to look at that very high level, the level of lease aircraft at that level, not the nitty-gritty of it. And then you say, which of these could be automated given what we've already got? What is our current platform? There are very few organizations which start from a completely greenfield site. They're always starting with legacy systems, with a budget in mind, etc., etc. So, and there is always the technology is constantly evolving. So what aspects and activities related to those main activities of the business, of the workflow, could be automated? And then once you look at what could be automated, you make a decision. Do we want to automate or not, given our constraints? And that gives you another decision. If we don't automate, we'll need these types of people, or this type of outsourcing, or this type of relationship with whoever's going to deliver it. And if we are going to automate, this means X, Y, and Z. We have to find a supplier. That means developing a relationship with the software provider. Do we want to have our own in-house system? Are we going to get an off-the-shelf system, etc.?
So in terms of organizational design, are there particular steps that you must take where do you start? I know we talked about the business model, but I'm sure there are other processes that you have to go through as you are planning your business model, your organizational design. In brief, maybe if you can just take us the steps.
Well,
Let's say it's a board sitting somewhere and they're contemplating doing an organizational design. What would you tell them?
It depends where the organization is in their thinking.
Mm-hmm.
If there's an executive team and all they're doing is looking at the organization chart and saying, oh, we need to give Peter a plum job in the organization, let's create a new division. Mm-hmm. Then that's a very different starting point from if they're saying we need a new strategy to develop a new market in a new country. Mm-hmm. And so what I try and do initially is find out kind of what Ken Shepherd in his 10 rules of thumb for change agents, which are excellent rules of thumb. The first rule of thumb is begin where the system is. Mm-hmm. So you sort of start to work out what is in their minds. Are they trying to design around giving key people new roles in order to motivate them or keep them order? Or have they actually got a longer term strategy to develop their business? Mm-hmm. And then I start to ask questions. So one of the key skills for organization design is being able to ask a lot of fairly challenging kind of open questions of what are you trying to achieve? How far is the executive team agreed on what they're trying to achieve? How long do you want this to be your part of your strategy? How are you measuring the risks and benefits of whatever it is you're trying to do? Mm-hmm. And so you're getting, in the methodology, you're getting an assessment of the organization and the leaders' mindsets about it. Mm-hmm. And having done that first step of assessing, you can then start to think, here are some possible ways forward. Mm-hmm. which you then present, and out of the possible ways forward, you can then start to get a high-level design and then a more detailed design, and then a plan to transition. Now that's fairly systematic. If you're doing the continuous approach, you need to be continuously assessing, and that's much more problematic because organizational leaders tend to think of organization design as an initiative or a program. You know, we need to cut costs, or we need to open a new market as a kind of one-off rather than a continuous activity. And the continuous activity requires more thoughtful approaches, because you need a body of people continuously looking at what's going on in the organization. And one that I noticed yesterday and started to think about, which I've done no investigation of because I only saw it yesterday, was that McDonald's is pulling out of Russia after 30 years.
Yes, I read about that, yes.
Okay, so that then throws up, is this a change of strategy? Mm-hmm. Is it going to be permanent? Is it a temporary thing? And I'm sure they've got some answers to these. I simply haven't looked yet. How many people are involved? What knock-on effect does that have into purchasing, into supply chain, into relationships with suppliers, into relationships in a geopolitical sense with other countries, et cetera, et cetera? How does that reputational aspect of McDonald's stack up against, I think one of the other fast food people have decided to stay there. Maybe, I'm not sure which one it is. But, you know, there's a whole design around how you're designing your reputation, which is much more of a kind of soft design thing than the supply chain hard design thing. But it is possible that if they were doing continuous design, they may not have fixed on Russia, but they may, because there's, you know, conflict all over the world, they may have thought, what if we have to pull out of country X, and be sort of doing scenario planning for it. And then you've got a continuous resilience being catered for, in a sense, or thought about.
Yeah, so when you look at some of the way most of these designs in quotes are done, people go and say, you know what, we've got too many. Let me give you the typical one. The structure is top heavy.
Yeah.
How does that relate to organizational design, and how do you deal with that? And what is top heavy?
Yes, well, the politics of organizations are a completely different thing to design. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, designers have to bear the politics in mind. And top heaviness depends on what you're trying to do. Your cost ratio compared with your productivity and your cost to customers and what have you. Mm-hmm. Top heavy may be fine in certain circumstances. Supposing you were a research lab, it mm-hmm. may be much better to have a whole lot of more senior people and very few kind of beginner and apprentices, mm-hmm. or a slower stream of beginner scientists coming up because you've got the experts at the top. So how part of your decision on whether something is top heavy depends on what your product or service is. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons things get top heavy is because people want promotion. Mm-hmm. And that is a questionable idea of in order to progress in an organization, you need to go up a hierarchy. It's one of the difficulties of hierarchical organizations. Mm-hmm. Which is related to the value that people place on grade and kind of job title. Mm-hmm. If we were able to be more useful or optimistic about grade and job title, and go for job enrichment and job expansion and valuing technical expertise at the same pay level as managerial expertise, you wouldn't mm-hmm. get the same types of top heaviness. In most organizations I've worked with, to progress, you move from technical expertise to managerial roles. Mm-hmm. And then the organization has risks two things. One, losing the technical expertise. And mm-hmm. two, putting a person in a managerial role who's utterly hopeless at it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Whereas if the performance rewards and the pay and benefits and what have you valued contribution of technical expertise or coaching or mentoring or numerous other things around job expansion and technical expertise, you wouldn't get that same type of top heaviness around the top tiers, which I think that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. The difficulty is once they're there, what do you do with them? You can't suddenly say, okay, you're going to get a pay cut or thank mm-hmm. you. Well, I mean, you can say, sorry, your role is redundant or mm-hmm. whatever. But that risks motivational issues and heaven knows what. But mm-hmm. You could start to have an organizational discussion about we want to value people for things other than managerial expertise, and we want to reduce the organizational kind of cultural value placed on grade progression. And maybe in some organizations they've banded the grades, and in some organizations they've expanded roles, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then you pay commensurate. So your pay differentials become much more distributed rather than focused in managerial roles.
Yeah, there is also I've been reading a lot about the issue around this area around levels of work. Is there any relationship between all levels of work and the organizational design, or have you used any of the models that have been used around the issue of levels of work? We're basically looking at the complexity of the business model, or the complexity of the work to be done.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because there is a relationship. Mm-hmm. Teasing it out is more difficult because the content of work changes or could potentially change. And I'll give you an example of that I came across, because a lot of things that people used to do manually can now be done through algorithms and automated.
Mm-hmm.
But people want to hang on to the manual effort. So in an insurance company, there are lots of people doing, I've forgotten the exact name of the role, but essentially assessing whether somebody's insurance claim is valid and true. Now that can be done by automation now, by looking at, history. But people want to hang on to their roles, and what you're trying, and the content of the role is changing. And I'm sure the same, what's happened in your specific role, the content of what you're doing is very different now from, say, 10 years ago. Because your work effort is changed, and you've got more tools at your disposal, or a different market, or whatever else. And often the possibilities are changing much more quickly than the workforce or the leaders are willing to kind of look at effectively. And being able to be fairly dispassionate, which is incredibly difficult, and say, well, this is what we're going to do. But you could prepare people for that, because often people have skills which are totally unexplored in an organization. If you think about one organization I worked in, it was ages ago, but there was a person on the door of the organization, and in those days we had a pass with our photo on, and the person looked at the photo and looked at our face, and they matched. It wasn't a swipe through thing. And I thought this must be the most boring job in the world, and I started to chat to the person over several weeks, and in the end I discovered he was a rose grower, but not just, he didn't just grow roses, he was the European champion, European class champion in a specific type of rose that he'd bred and grown, and was incredibly expert in that field. And I said, why on earth are you doing this job then? And he said, well, because it's completely mindless and boring. I can think about roses the whole time. And I thought that was so great.
Yeah.
Well, it also suggested to me, to be a champion rose grower, you need to have incredible skill, because he was breeding them. He was hybriding them. He had huge patience. He was able to think logically through, if I graft this rose onto that rootstock, this may happen. And he was able to influence fellow rose growers and win competitions. And imagine the skills of being a champion rose grower, completely unnoticed in the organization, because they were that. But most people have those sorts of unexplored skills. And one of the interesting things about COVID, certainly in the UK, was people from all walks of life leapt into different roles in their communities, and you could see all these skills surfacing. So we could be saying to people, we know if we went down the continuous organization design route, we know the organization is going to change shape over time. We do want to keep as many people as we can in this organization, if that's what you actually do want to do. What are the skills that we can develop in you that we don't know about, that you would like to develop, so on and so forth, that could take us into this future together? And you tend to find in that are more collaborative, cooperative organizations that can actually happen, and they tend to be smaller. But there are some good examples of cooperatives, and there's some very good farming cooperatives in India, which are full of this sort of innovation, dairy farming particularly.
As we come to the close of this session, I just want to find out from you, what are some of the signs of a faulty organizational design? that if you are observing, you can say this is likely to be a problem of the design of the organization.
Well, I collect those. As I go into any shop or product or service relationship, I think, oh my God. But you can see it in things, you can see it in ways where people are not allowed to use their initiative quite often. So, for example, I mean, yesterday it was a classic for me. I thought, oh, this is typical. So I wanted to get on a bus, and I had a 4-year-old with me and a 2-year-old and a buggy. And on the UK buses in London, you can only have 2 buggies on a bus at a time. Otherwise, you can't get on, which everybody knows, that's fine. But I was getting on, a woman with a buggy got off. So there must have been 1 buggy place. So I started to get on, and the driver said, no, you can't get on. And I said, why not? She said, there's no room for your buggy. And I looked in the bus and I thought there was room, but there was a person with a wheelchair, which took up more room actually than a buggy. And I thought and I said to the bus driver, I'm only going 2 stops, which I was. She said, no, you can't get on. And I thought, what is preventing her from using her initiative? She's seen a woman with a buggy get off. A woman with a buggy wants to get on, i.e. me. What is going on in her mind? And I just decided I was going to get on anyway. But she was right in a sense, because my buggy was bigger than the woman's who had just got off. But nevertheless, it was only 2 stops. And I thought, you know, if she felt empowered to make decisions herself on, I think, passenger safety, which is fair enough. Or I could have folded the buggy, or she could have said, you can fold the buggy and get on. Then there were lots of ways of solving the problem, but not in the heat of the moment. And if you look around organizations, these things are really there all the time. Like another one I loved was, over the photocopier, we empower you to do your own development and learning pathways. So I log on to do my own learning and development pathway. This learning that you want to do is only available for grade X, and you're not in that grade. So there's often a disconnect between a statement and the carrying it out, which is the design thing. Or, you know, endless forms that you get to fill in that don't give them the information that they think the form is going to get. Those are all the small design things. And if you start collecting them and you feed them back to people, they can see that, but they don't see it as in the holistic design thing. And there's some great ones, like the ATM machines in the walls in the UK. The ATM machine, some of them are sited too low for when the screen gets blocked by sunlight, or they're too high and people in the wheelchair can't reach them. You know.
Yes. Okay.
There's endless things.
Yeah. So maybe as we close in your closing remarks, what advice would you give to? I want to focus mainly on the board. If they are designing an organization or they're thinking about redesigning their organization, what advice would you give them?
My advice, which is it's never taken really, it has been on 1 or 2 occasions, is to go and sit and do the work beside the person doing the work of the area you are thinking of redesigning. So if you think your call center has got too many people, or you want to automate it, go and sit in the call center for a day or a week or whatever it is, beside an actual call center operative, and see what they're doing and listen to them. One of the difficulties about organization design is that it tends to be vested in the thinking of the leaders, but they are not doing the day-to-day actual work. So they're not on the floor in a supermarket stacking shelves. They're not in a bus on their own driving a bus.
Mm.
They don't know what the work is that they're trying to redesign. They've got, and until you know what it is that you're trying to design, it's very, very difficult because you haven't experienced it.
Mm.
I mean, you can imagine if you take a cup just like this. If you've never seen a cup and I say to you, we need a new cup, and you've never gripped one and picked it up by the handle or whatever, it's going to be really difficult to know whether you want a curved shape or a handle like that or two handles or whatever it is. You really have to experience the work. And some of the better organizations, they've got people at the top who have come up through the ranks. So they've experienced the work at every level and can have a much better grip on what it is that they're trying to design. If you kind of fly in a new CEO, some of them are very, very good, but the ones who are very, very good, they do tend to be more collaborative and involve a bigger range of people in decisions that they make. He's retired now, but if you hear Alan Mulally talk, he's about Ford. He's very, very interesting about getting involvement from the factory floor operatives when he's thinking about doing stuff. And it doesn't mean you have.
Is it a book or is just he has got written a lot?
Alan Mulally, there's an excellent talk he gave at the Wharton Commencement School, which is a 1-hour talk. I can send you the link if you would like.
Yeah, yes, I would love to watch that.
That's very, very good, and it sort of encapsulates his, decades of CEO-ship in a very approachable talk. Although it is 1 hour, which some people find a long time. You could listen to it in 20-minute section. But he also has written a few books, and if you look at the history of Ford while he was in the CEO, you'll see how he managed to bring it up. Ford was the only organization at the time of the financial crash in 2008 of the car producers which didn't need a government bailout due to his management style.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We have gone an hour and 5 minutes, I think. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity. I will share the link with you once we have finished editing the clip. And I hope I can call you upon you again. As I'm following your LinkedIn posts. That's why I pick some of these things and wanting clarification. So I will probably in the next 2 months or so call upon you again, because there are some that I've bookmarked that I want to pursue. Yeah. Otherwise, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.